Section 30, page 148. Archer felt irrationally angry. His host's contemptuous tribute to May's niceness was just what a husband should have wished to hear said of his wife. The fact that a coarse-minded man found her lacking in attraction was simply another proof of her quality, yet the words sent a faint shiver through his heart. What if niceness, carried to that supreme degree, were only a negation, the curtain dropped for an emptiness? As he looked at May, returning flushed and calm from her final bullseye, he had the feeling that he had never yet lifted that curtain. She took the congratulations of her rivals and of the rest of the company with the simplicity that was her crowning grace. No one could ever be jealous of her triumphs, because she managed to give the feeling that she would have been just as serene as if she had missed them. But when her eyes met her husband's, her face glowed with the pleasure she saw in his. Mrs. Welland's basket-work pony carriage was waiting for them, and they drove off among the dispersing carriages, May handling the reins and Archer sitting at her side. The afternoon sunlight still lingered upon the bright lawns and shrubberies, and up and down Belleville Avenue rolled a double line of victorias, dog-carts, landaus, and vis-a-vis, carrying well-dressed ladies and gentlemen away from the Beaufort garden party, or homeward from their delightful afternoon turn along the Ocean Drive. "Shall we go to see Granny?" May suddenly proposed. "I should like to tell her myself that I am won the prize. There is lots of time before dinner." Archer acquiesced, and she turned the ponies down Narragansett Avenue, crossed Spring Street, and drove out toward the rocky moorland beyond. In this unfashionable region, Catherine the Great, always indifferent to precedent and thrifty of purse, had built herself in her yacht a many-peaked and cross-beamed cottage-corn on a bit of cheap land overlooking the bay. Here, in the thicket of stunted oaks, her verandas spread themselves above the island-dotted waters. A winding drive led up between iron stacks and blue glass balls embedded in mounds of geraniums to a front door of highly varnished walnut under a striped veranda roof, and behind it ran a narrow hall with a black and yellow star-patterned parquet floor, upon which opened floor small square rooms with heavy flock papers, under ceilings on which an Italian house painter had lavished all the divinities of Olympus. One of these rooms had been turned into a bedroom by Mrs. Mingott, when the burden of flesh descended on her, and in the adjoining one she spent her days, enthroned in a large armchair between the open door and window, and perpetually waving a palm-leaf fan with the prodigious projection of her bosom kept so far from the rest of her person that the arid sun in motion stirred only the fringe of the antimacassars on the chair arms. Since she had been the means of hastening his marriage, old Catherine had shown to Archer the cordiality which a service rendered excites toward the person served. She was persuaded that irrepressible passion was the cause of his impatience, and being an ardent admirer of impulsiveness, in parentheses, when it did not lead to the spending of money, she always received him with a genial twinkle of complicity and a play of allusion to which May seemed fortunately impervious. She examined and appraised with much interest in the diamond-tipped arrow which had been pinned on May's bosom at the conclusion of the match, remarking that in her day a filigree brooch would have been thought enough. But there was no denying that Beaufort did things handsomely. "Quite an heirloom, in fact, my dear," the old lady chuckled. "You must leave it in fee to your eldest girl." She pinched May's white arm and watched the color flood her face. Well, what have I said to make you shake out of the red flag? Aren't there going to be any daughters? Only boys, eh? Good gracious, look at her blushing again all over her blushes. What, can I say that either? Mercy me. When my children beg me to have all those gods and goddesses painted overhead, I always say I am too thankful to have somebody about me that nothing can shock. Archer burst into a laugh, and May echoed it, crimson to the eyes. Well, now tell me about all the party, please, my dears, for I shall never get a straight word about it out of that silly Medora. The ancestress continued, and as May exclaimed, Cousin Medora, but I thought she was going back to the Portsmouth. She answered placidly, So she is, but she's got to come here first to pick up Ellen. Ah, you didn't know Ellen had come to spend the day with me. Such folderol. Her not coming for this summer. But I gave up arguing with young people about 50 years ago. Ellen, Ellen, she cried in her shrill old voice, trying to bend forward far enough to catch a glimpse of the lawn beyond the veranda. There was no answer, and Mrs. Wingett rapped impatiently with her stick on the shiny floor. Emlot, the maid-servant in a bright turban, replying to the summons, informed her mistress that she had seen Miss Ellen going down to the path to the shore, and Mrs. Wingett turned to Archer. Run down and fetch her, like a good grandson. This pretty lady will describe the party to me, she said, and Archer stood up as if in a dream. He had heard the Countess Olenska's name pronounced often enough during the year and a half since they had last met, and was even familiar with the main incidents of her life in the interval. He knew that she had spent the previous summer at Newport, where she appeared to have gone a great deal into society, but that in the autumn she had suddenly sublet the perfect house, which Beaufort had been at such pains to find for her, and decided to establish herself in Washington. There, during the winter, he had heard of her, in parentheses, as one always heard of pretty women in Washington, as shining in the brilliant diplomatic society. That was supposed to make up for the social shortcomings of the administration. He had listened to these accounts and to various contradictory reports on her appearance, her conversation, her point of view, and her choice of friends, with the detachment with which one listens to reminiscences of some long signs since that. Not till Medora suddenly spoke her name at the archery match had Ellen Olenska become a living presence to him again. The Marchioness's foolish lips had called up a vision of the little firelit drawing room, and the sound of the carriage wheels returning down the deserted street. He thought of a story he had read, of some peasant children in Tuscany lighting a bunch of straw in a wayside cavern, and revealing old silent images in their painted tomb. The way to the shore descended from the bank, on which the house was perched to a walk above the water planted with weeping willows. Through their veil Archer caught the glint of the lime rock, with its whitewashed turret, and the tiny house in which the heroic lighthouse keeper, Ida Alves, was living her last venerable years. Beyond it lay the flat reaches and ugly government chimneys of God Island, the bay spreading northward in a shimmer of gold to Prudence Island, with its low growth of oaks, and the shores of Connicut faint in the sunset haze. From the willow walk projected a slight wooden pier ending in a sort of pagoda-like summer house, and in the pagoda a lady stood, leaning against the rail, her back to the shore. Archer stopped at the sight as if he had waked from sleep. That vision of the past was a dream, and reality was what awaited him in the house on the bank overhead. Was Mrs. Welland's pony carriage circling around and around at the oval door? Was May sitting under the shameless Olympians and glowing with secret hopes? Was the Welland villa at the far end of Belleville Avenue, and Mr. Welland already dressed for dinner, and pacing the drawing room floor, watch in hand, with dyspeptic impatience, for it was one of the houses in which one always knew exactly what is happening at a given hour. What am I, a son-in-law? Archer thought. The figure at the end of the pier had not moved, For a long moment the young man stood halfway down the bank, gazing at the bay furrowed with the coming and going of sailboats, yacht launches, fishing craft, and the trailing black coal barges, hauled by nosy tugs. The lady in the summer house seemed to be held by the same sight. Beyond the grey bastions of the Fort Adams, a long-drawn sunset was splintering up into 1,000 fires, and the radiance caught up the sail of a catboat, as it beat out through the channel between the lime rock and the shore. Arthur, as he watched, remembered the scene in the Shangaroon, and the Montague lifting a dice ribbon to his lips without her knowing that he was in the room. She doesn't know, she hasn't guessed. Shouldn't I know if she came up behind me, I wonder, he mused, and suddenly he said to himself, if she doesn't turn before that sail crosses the lime rock lights, I will go back. The boat was gliding out on the receding tide. It slid before the lime rock, blotted out at the Lewis's little house, and passed across the torrent in which the light was hung. Archer waited till a wide space of water sparkled between the last reef of the island and the stern of the boat, but still the figure in the summer house didn't move. He turned and walked up the hill. I'm sorry you didn't find Ellen. I should have liked to see her again, May said, as they drove home through the dusk. But perhaps she wouldn't have cared. She seems so changed. Changed, echoed her husband in a colorless voice, his eyes fixed on the pony's twitching ears. So indifferent to her friends, I mean, giving up New York and her house, and spending her time with such queer people. Fancy how hideously uncomfortable she must be at the Blankers. She says she does it to keep Cousin Medora out of mischief, to prevent her marrying dreadful people. But I sometimes think we have always bored her. Archer made no answer, and she continued, with a tinge of a hardness that he had never before noticed in her frank, fresh voice. After all, I wonder if she wouldn't be happier with her husband. He burst into a laugh. Sancta simplicitas, he exclaimed, and as she turned a puzzled frown on him, he added, I don't think I ever heard you say a cruel thing before. Cruel? Well, watching the consortiums of the damned is supposed to be a favorite sport of the Angles, but I believe even they don't think people happier in hell. It's a pity she ever married abroad then, said May, in the placid tone with which her mother met Mr. Welland's vagaries, and Archer felt himself gently relegated to the category of unreasonable husbands. They drove down Bellevue Avenue and turned in between the chamfered wooden gate posts, surmounted by the cast-iron lamps, which marked the approach to the Welland villa. Lights were already shining through its windows, and Archer, as the carriage stopped, caught a glimpse of his father-in-law, exactly as he had pictured him, pacing in the drawing-room, watch in hand and wearing the pained expression that he had long since found to be much more efficacious than anger. The young man, as he followed his wife into the hall, was conscious of a curious reversal of mood. There was something about the luxury of the Welland house and the density of the Welland atmosphere, so charged with the minute observance and exactions, that always stole into his system like a narcotic. The heavy carpets, the watchful servants, the perpetually reminding tick of disciplined clocks, the perpetually renewed stacks of cards and invitations on the hall table, the whole chain of tyrannical trifles, binding one over the next, and each member of household to all the others, made any less systematized and affluent existence seems unreal and precocious. But now it was the Welland house, and the life he was expected to lead in it, that had become unreal and irrelevant, and the brief scene on the shore, when he had stood irresolute halfway down the bank, was as close to him as the blood in his veins. All night he lay awake in the big Chin's bedroom at May's side, watching the moonlight slant along the carpet, and thinking of Ellen Olenska driving home across the gleaming beaches behind Beaufort's trotters. End of the section. Page 153.